The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happy to yield 2 minutes to my colleague from the great state of Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on my first day serving in this Congress, I introduced a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, and I'm honored to be co-sponsoring the bill on the floor today. As I travel back home in my district, as I'm sure so many of my colleagues do, get this question. And I'm repeatedly asked, why doesn't Congress manage the national budget the same way businesses manage their budgets and families manage their budget? Why doesn't Congress follow the same rules that businesses and families do, that we only spend what we generate in revenues? And it's a good question, Mr. Speaker, which gets us to the need for a balanced budget amendment. One would think that we would not need to amend the Constitution to do what members of this body should be doing anyway. This is common sense, Mr. Speaker, but for decades we've seen the problem perpetuate, which is the responsibility of both parties. And I'm convinced that this is the only mechanism to force this body to balance the budget. $21 trillion in debt, Mr. Speaker. And to my friends voicing opposition, we need to be honest about what this bill does. This bill does not necessitate any cuts of any kind. It simply requires that the budget balance. A commitment to raising revenues through pro-growth economic policies is the answer. And that's what this bill will force this body to do, raise revenues to offset expenditures on a dollar-for-dollar basis. Mr. Speaker, prior to this Congress, our economy was sluggishly growing at about 1.6 growth in GDP, which is fiscally and financially unsustainable. We are now well over 2%, on our way to 3%, and we need to get to 4%. And as one of only a handful of CPAs in this Congress, I know that economic growth has three essential components: tax reform, regulatory reform, and a balanced budget. When you balance the books, you create jobs, which leads to more revenue, which leads to an expanding economy, making it easier for us to fund our critical priorities like serving our veterans, protecting our troops, funding public education, and preserving our environment. Mr. Speaker, that is what this bill is about. And that's why I'm proud to co-sponsor this legislation. This is common sense, Mr. Speaker. The American people won by overwhelming margins. We need to get this done for them. It's our moral responsibility. I yield back.
We reserve.